My name is Lily, and I'm 23 years old. For most of my life, I was the invisible daughter, the quiet one with a silly hobby, while my older sister Clara soaked up all the light in the room. My parents told me I wasn't pretty enough to wear a dress, the very dress that I had poured my soul into creating. They said it in front of my sister, who just smiled that perfect, pitying smile of hers. What they didn't know was that my secret mentor, a legendary designer I only knew by a pseudonym online, was the head judge of the competition I was about to enter. And he was about to announce my name in front of the entire fashion world and my family, who came expecting to watch me fail. If you've ever felt underestimated or been told you weren't enough, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. And before I tell you how this one dress unraveled a lifetime of lies, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about finding your voice when everyone else is trying to silence it. Before that night, my life was a carefully constructed exercise in taking up as little space as possible. I was a student at the local community college, studying fashion design, a passion my parents referred to as my little sewing project. Our family home in the suburbs of Charlotte was a shrine to my older sister, Clara. Every mantelpiece, every wall, every photo album was a testament to her achievements. Clara, 5 years my senior, was the golden child, the sun around which our family universe orbited. She had the perfect marketing job at a downtown firm, the perfect fiancé who was a junior partner at a law firm, and a perfect, effortless beauty that made people stop and stare. My parents, Richard and Helen, were her biggest fans. Their pride in her was a loud, constant broadcast. I, on the other hand, was the quiet moon, only visible when her light wasn't too blinding. I wasn't unattractive, but in the shadow of Clara, I felt plain. Where she was polished, I was practical. Where she was articulate, I was observant. I paid for my own tuition by working 2 part-time jobs, one at a coffee shop smelling of burnt espresso and another at a fabric store, where I spent my meager paycheck on discounted remnants of silk and velvet. My world was my small bedroom, which I had converted into a makeshift studio. A second-hand dress form I'd named Florence stood in one corner, perpetually draped in muslin. My walls were covered, not in photos, but in sketches, fabric swatches, and tear-outs from magazines, a secret world of beauty they never bothered to enter. It was my sanctuary, the only place where the volume of my own thoughts was louder than their expectations. The pattern of favoritism wasn't a secret. It was the foundation of our family. It was in the way my father's voice would boom with pride when Clara announced a minor corporate achievement, while my acceptance into my design program was met with a distracted, "Oh, that's nice, dear. Just make sure you have a real career to fall back on." He came from a background where success was measured in stock portfolios and job titles, and my world of art and creation was, to him, frivolous and unstable. My mother, who had once dreamed of being a painter before settling into suburban life, seemed to see Clara as the realization of her own deferred ambitions, a shinier, more successful version of herself. My dreams, too close to her own abandoned ones, seemed to make her uncomfortable, so she dismissed them. This dynamic was cemented in my mind as early as elementary school. I remember one specific instance in 4th grade. I had spent a month working on a diorama of a scene from my favorite book. It was incredibly detailed, with tiny, hand-sewn costumes for the figures and a backdrop I had painted with watercolors. The same week, Clara, then in high school, won a regional debate tournament. The night I brought my diorama home with its first-place blue ribbon, my parents' house was already full of balloons and a banner that read, "Congratulations, Clara!" My father was on the phone, loudly telling my uncle about Clara's victory. I stood in the doorway, holding my project, waiting for a pause that never came. Eventually, my mother noticed me. "Oh, Lily, what's that?" she asked, her eyes already glancing towards Clara, who was holding court in the living room. I showed her the ribbon. "That's very sweet," she said, patting my head. "Go put it in your room before it gets in the way." Later that night, I overheard my father telling my mother, "Clara is going to be a leader. Lily is a nice girl. A nice girl." It felt like a consolation prize for not being Clara. The most painful proof came during my senior prom. I had spent months designing my own dress. It was an ambitious design, a deep midnight blue satin with hand-stitched silver beading that mimicked a starry sky. It was everything I had dreamed of. When I showed the final sketch to my mother, she'd placed her hand on mine, her expression one of deep, weary concern. "Lily, honey," she'd said, her voice laced with pity. "This is a lot. It's very complicated. Are you sure you can even make something like this? Why don't we just go to the mall and find you something nice? We don't want you to look homemade." The word hung in the air, thick with shame. Homemade. As if my own two hands were incapable of creating something beautiful. I tried to argue, to show her the fabric I'd already bought, the beads I'd painstakingly sourced. But my father overheard and ended the discussion from his armchair. "Your mother is right. Clara is going with her friends from college. We're buying her a designer dress from the boutique downtown. We'll get you a matching one so you don't feel left out." They didn't understand. I didn't want to match Clara. I wanted to be myself. In the end, I wore a bland, off-the-rack dress they picked out. It was a pretty dress, but it wasn't mine. It felt like a costume for a person I didn't want to be. Clara, of course, looked breathtaking in her $1,000 gown. That night, I watched her dance from the sidelines, feeling like a ghost in my own life, and vowed that one day I would create something so beautiful, so undeniably me, that they would have no choice but to see it. This dynamic bled into every aspect of our lives. They paid for Clara's 4-year university degree and her first car without a second thought. My community college fees were my own responsibility. "It builds character," my father would say, seemingly oblivious to the fact that Clara's character was being built on a foundation of privilege and praise. When I won a small local art scholarship for a collection of my fashion illustrations, the prize was only $500. But to me, it was everything. It was the first external validation I'd ever received. When I called my parents to share the news, my mother's response was, "Oh, that's wonderful, sweetie." Then, without pausing for breath, she said, "Speaking of wonderful news, Clara just got a new corner office. Can you believe it? We're taking her out to celebrate tonight. You should come." I went, of course. I spent the entire dinner listening to them toast Clara's new office, her new title, her brilliant future. My $500 scholarship was never mentioned again. It was a small thing, a tiny cut, but it was one of 1,000. It was the constant, dripping erosion of my self-worth. I learned to keep my dreams to myself, to nurture them in the quiet of my room, away from their casual dismissiveness. My designs became more intricate, my skills sharper. My passion wasn't a hobby. It was my sanctuary. It was the one place where I was in control, where my vision was the only one that mattered. My only real confidant was my best friend, Alex. We'd met in a particularly grueling art history class, bonding over our shared love for historical costume and our mutual disdain for our professor. Alex was everything. I wasn't bold, outspoken, and fiercely loyal. He was the one who saw the stacks of sketches in my room and didn't see a hobby. He saw a career. He was the one who would look at my parents' blatant favoritism and call it what it was. "Wrong. They're blind, Lily," he'd say, holding up one of my designs. "Anyone with eyes can see you're a genius. One day, they're going to be begging for front row seats." I'd always laugh it off, a hollow sound in my own ears, but a part of me clung to his words like a life raft. I told myself that this time would be different. A new competition was my chance to finally prove them all wrong. I had no idea it would become the stage for our family's final, devastating performance. The catalyst arrived in the form of an email with a subject line that made my heart leap into my throat. Announcing the 8th annual Next Gen Fashion Award. It wasn't just any competition. It was the competition. The grand prize was a $25,000 grant, a 1-year mentorship with the legendary designer Antoine Dubois, and a feature in Vogue. Winning this wouldn't just be a victory. It would be a different life. It was a path out of my cramped bedroom studio, away from the smell of burnt coffee, and into the world I had only dreamed of. Antoine Dubois was a god in my world. He was a designer who had revolutionized haute couture in the 90 seconds with his blend of architectural precision and romantic storytelling. I had a well-worn copy of his retrospective book on my nightstand, its pages filled with images of his iconic creations, like the glasswing gown that looked like it was spun from captured moonlight. The idea of him even seeing my work, let alone mentoring me, felt like a fantasy too grand to even whisper. For a week, I just stared at the announcement, a paralyzing mix of terror and longing churning in my stomach. The previous winners were all graduates from prestigious schools like Parsons or Central St. Martin's. I was a student at Northwood Community College. It felt like trying to climb Mount Everest in flip-flops. The doubt, a familiar, cold voice that sounded suspiciously like my mother's, whispered that I wasn't good enough, that I would only embarrass myself. I spent days sketching ideas, only to crumple them up in frustration. Nothing felt good enough. One night, after tossing out a dozen concepts, I nearly gave up entirely, closing my sketchbook and pushing it to the back of my desk. The risk of failure felt too public, too humiliating. But then there was another voice, a quieter one, that asked, what if? What if Alex was right? What if I really did have a talent worth showing? The thought was a tiny spark in the darkness of my insecurity. That weekend, I went to the fabric store, not to work, but to wander. I ran my hands over bolts of charmeuse and organza, feeling the textures, imagining what they could become. In that quiet, sacred space, the spark grew into a flame. I knew I had to try. My decision was solidified by an unlikely source. For the past year, I had been an active member of an exclusive online forum for aspiring designers. It was an anonymous community where we could share work and get critiques. One member, who went by the username Aurelius, was a legend. His critiques were brutally honest but incredibly insightful. He saw things no one else did, the structural integrity of a garment from a single sketch, the emotional resonance of a color palette. People whispered he was a retired industry icon. Getting a positive comment from Aurelius was like receiving a blessing from the fashion gods. I had posted a few of my early concepts for the competition, a mess of confused ideas, and his response had been a single, electrifying sentence. Less apology, more conviction. The core idea is strong. Don't hide it. His words became my mantra. I decided to announce my entry at our weekly Sunday dinner, hoping for, if not enthusiasm, then at least a sliver of support. The atmosphere was already thick with Clara. She had spent the first 20 minutes of the meal detailing every lavish aspect of her upcoming wedding: the 5-star venue, the imported flowers, the designer of her own wedding gown. I waited for a lull, a small pocket of silence, and took my chance. I have some exciting news, I began, my hands trembling slightly under the table. There's a really big design competition, the Next Gen Award, and I've decided to enter. Silence. My father slowly put down his fork. He looked at my mother, then back at me. The Next Gen Award? He said, a note of disbelief in his voice. Isn't that for, real designers, the ones in New York? It's open to students across the country, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My mother wrung her hands. Oh, Lily, are you sure that's a good idea? The competition will be so fierce. I just don't want to see you get your hopes up and be disappointed. Remember that school art fair in middle school? You were so upset when you only got an honorable mention. The casual mention of a decade-old memory, another small failure in her ledger of my life, was like a needle prick. It was Clara who delivered the final, patronizing blow. She reached across the table and patted my hand, her diamond engagement ring glinting under the dining room lights. Oh, Lily, that's so cute that you're trying, she said, her voice dripping with condescending sweetness. It's good to have goals. Just don't be crushed when you don't win, okay? It's the taking part that counts. Besides, everyone needs a hobby. A hobby. The air went out of me. It wasn't just a lack of support. It was an immediate assumption of my failure. They didn't see a daughter or a sister chasing a dream. They saw a little girl playing dress-up, destined to lose. I felt that old, familiar shame creep in, hot and suffocating. But then, I remembered Aurelius's words. Less apology, more conviction. I believe I have a good idea, I said, looking each of them in the eye, and I'm going to give it my all. My father just grunted and picked up his fork. My mother changed the subject back to Clara's wedding plans, asking about cake flavors. The message was clear. My little project was a momentary distraction, but the real world, Clara's world, was what truly mattered. I sat through the rest of the dinner in a haze, the clinking of silverware and their cheerful chatter a dull roar in my ears. They thought they had put me back in my box, but they had done the opposite. They had drawn a line in the sand. Their doubts only fueled my fire. With Aurelius's guidance echoing in my mind, I poured everything I had into my design, completely unaware that the real storm was gathering not in the design studio, but within the walls of my own home. The next 2 months were a blur of sleepless nights and caffeine-fueled days. My design, which I had titled The Reclamation, was the most ambitious thing I had ever conceived. It was a floor-length gown, but with an architectural, almost sculptural quality. It was designed to be both strong and soft, a contradiction I felt deep in my own soul. It represented the reclaiming of one's own beauty and power. The centerpiece was a bodice made of a liquid silver silk that I had to special order, using every penny I had saved from the art scholarship and months of tips from the coffee shop. The arrival of that fabric was a moment of pure magic. I unrolled the bolt in my room, and the material cascaded onto the floor like moonlight. It was perfect. In a moment of rare optimism, I decided to show my family. Maybe, just maybe, if they saw the quality of the material, they would understand the seriousness of my ambition. I brought the silk into the living room where my mother and Clara were watching a reality TV show. "This is the fabric for my competition dress," I said, my voice filled with reverence. My mother reached out and touched it. Her lips pursed. "My goodness, Lily, how much did this cost? You should be saving your money, not spending it on cloth. You'll need a sensible car one day." End quote. Clara was more dismissive. "It's very shiny," she said, her eyes not leaving the television screen. "Are you sure it's not a bit much? You don't want to look like you're trying too hard." Defeated, I rolled the precious fabric back up and took it to my room, placing it carefully on my highest shelf. The next morning, when I took it down to begin cutting, my heart stopped. Near the center of the roll was a small, yellowish stain, no bigger than a quarter. It looked like a drop of coffee, or maybe tea. I never brought drinks near my workstation. I racked my brain, but I couldn't explain it. I had to spend an entire day painstakingly replanning my pattern pieces to cut around the stain, losing a significant amount of the expensive material in the process. When I mentioned it to my mother, she just waved her hand. "You must have been careless, dear. You've always been a bit clumsy." The accusation stung, but with no proof, I had to let it go. A small, ugly suspicion began to seed in my mind. As the dress began to take shape, Clara's involvement grew more insidious. She would pop into my room, offering helpful suggestions that were really just veiled criticisms. "You know, Lily," she said one afternoon, eyeing the asymmetrical neckline I was pinning, "that's very artistic, but most people prefer symmetry. It's more flattering. My fiancé's mother is on the board of a charity, and she says classic designs always do better at auctions." Every suggestion was designed to sand down the edges of my vision, to make it more conventional, more palatable, more Clara. I would politely thank her for the input, and then, in the privacy of my room, undo every change she'd suggested, feeling a mix of guilt and defiance. A week later, another strange incident occurred. I had a final project due for my pattern-making class, a complex design that required a specific set of expensive French curve rulers. I came home from work late one night to find them missing from my desk. I searched my room frantically, my panic rising. I finally found them in Clara's room, tossed in a drawer under a pile of her gym clothes, one of the delicate rulers snapped in half. When I confronted her, she barely looked up from her laptop. "Oh, right, I borrowed them," she said airily. "I needed something to draw a straight line for a presentation chart. I must have forgotten to put them back." "It's just a piece of plastic, Lily, don't be so dramatic." The replacement cost me $50 I didn't have and forced me to pull an all-nighter to finish my project, but to her, it was nothing. It was another signal that my tools, my work, my world were insignificant props in her own. My parents, of course, echoed her every word. "Listen to your sister, Lily," my father would say over dinner. "She has a good eye for what sells. This isn't just an art project. You have to think about the commercial appeal." They were a united front, a Greek chorus of conventionality, trying to mold my unique creation into something they could understand. The public humiliation came a few weeks before the competition deadline. It was my mother's birthday. While Clara had spent a small fortune on a designer handbag my mother had been coveting, I had poured my heart into a personal gift. I used a scrap of the silver silk and some midnight blue velvet to create a stunning, one-of-a-kind evening scarf, hand-beaded with my mother's initials in tiny crystals. It took me over 40 hours to make. At her birthday dinner, I presented it to her in a beautiful box, lined with tissue paper. "Oh, Lily," she said, her voice soft. "You made this? It's lovely." She held it up for a moment, then folded it neatly and placed it on the side table next to her. A moment later, Clara presented her gift. The reaction was electric. My mother gasped, tears welling in her eyes as she pulled the leather handbag from its dust cover. "Oh, Clara, you shouldn't have. It's perfect." The rest of the evening was dedicated to the handbag. It was passed around the table, admired, and praised. My scarf lay on the side table, forgotten. It felt like a physical representation of my place in the family, a thoughtful, handmade effort, easily overshadowed by a flashy, expensive purchase. I drove home that night with a lump in my throat. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. It wasn't that she didn't like my gift, it was that she didn't even truly see it. The next day, Alex came over to see my progress on the dress. He found me in my room, staring blankly at the half-finished gown. I told him everything: the stain, the broken ruler, the constant criticism, the birthday scarf. I laid out the sequence of events, my voice flat and tired. He listened patiently, his expression growing darker with every word. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. He walked over and gently touched the silver fabric of the dress. "Lily," he said, his voice serious. "You need to hear this. This isn't normal. Good families don't do this. Let's connect the dots. First, a mysterious stain appears on your one-of-a-kind fabric right after you show it to them. Then, your essential tools for a final project just happen to go missing and turn up broken in Clara's room. Now, your incredible, heartfelt gift is completely ignored. This isn't a series of unfortunate events. It's a campaign. The way they treat you, it's like they're actively trying to crush your spirit. It's not just favoritism anymore. This feels like sabotage." Oh, hearing him say the word aloud, sabotage was like a key turning in a lock. It validated every uncomfortable feeling, every flicker of suspicion I'd had. It wasn't in my head. I wasn't being too sensitive, as my mother always claimed. The environment I was in was actively hostile to my success. They weren't just neglecting my dream. They were trying to kill it before it could ever take flight. Alex was right. This wasn't just a lack of support. It was a quiet, insidious war against my confidence. I knew the final showcase was my only way out. But first, I had to survive the final fitting, an event that would become the breaking point I never saw coming. A week before the submission deadline, the dress was finally complete. It was, without a doubt, the best thing I had ever created. The silver silk bodice flowed into a dramatic, sweeping skirt of layered midnight blue organza and tulle. It was bold and ethereal at the same time. Looking at it standing on Florence, my dress form, I felt a flicker of pride so intense it almost scared me. For the first time, I saw my own potential staring back at me. This dress wasn't just stitched together with thread. It was held together by my resilience. I needed to do one final fitting. Check the seams, the drape, the movement. My parents' house had a large, full-length mirror in the entryway, the only one suitable. With a deep breath, I decided to ask them to be my audience. A foolish, hopeful part of me, a part that refused to die, no matter how many times they tried to kill it, thought that seeing the finished product, the culmination of all my work, would finally make them understand. I was still chasing that blue ribbon moment from 4th grade. That moment of pure, unqualified praise. I carefully brought the dress downstairs and set Florence up in front of the mirror. The silver silk shimmered under the chandelier, casting dancing lights on the walls. "Can you guys come here for a second?" I called out, my voice betraying a sliver of my nervousness. "I wanted to show you the finished dress." My father came out of his study, my mother from the kitchen, and Clara from the living room. They stood in a small semicircle, their arms crossed, their expressions neutral. For a moment, there was just silence as they took it in. I held my breath, praying for a single word of genuine praise. My father spoke first. He cleared his throat and tilted his head. "Well," he said slowly, "it's a lot of fabric. Must have cost a fortune. I hope you have a plan to make that money back." His first thought was about the cost, the return on investment, as if my soul had a price tag. I felt a small prick of disappointment, but I brushed it aside. He didn't understand design. Clara stepped closer, circling the dress like a shark. "It's very artistic," she said, drawing out the word as if it were an insult. "But who would actually wear that? It's not very practical. It's a bit aggressive, don't you think?" "It's haute couture," I explained, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. "It's not supposed to be practical. It's a statement." Then, my mother stepped forward. She didn't look at the dress. She looked at me. She placed a hand on my arm, her touch soft, her words sharp as glass. "Honey, the dress is beautiful, it truly is," she began, and for a heart-stopping second, I thought this was it, the moment of validation. But then she continued, her voice dropping to a confidential, concerned whisper. "But let's be realistic. You just don't have the presence to pull it off. You're not pretty enough for a dress like this. It would wear you, you see. It requires a certain confidence that that you've never really had." Unquote. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Not pretty enough. Not for my own creation. Not in my own home. My breath hitched in my chest. The room seemed to tilt, the light from the chandelier fracturing in my tear-filled eyes. It wasn't just an insult. It was a final verdict on my very being. As if that wasn't enough, Clara then delivered the killing stroke. She stepped up beside me, looking at her own reflection in the mirror next to the dress. She struck a pose, a smug, pitying smile playing on her lips. "Mom's right, Lily," she said softly, as if confiding a gentle truth. "It needs a certain kind of person to carry it. You know, could I try it on? Just to see how it hangs on a real person. I could wear it to the competition for you. Imagine the impact. It would give the dress the best possible chance. It would be a shame for the dress to go to waste if you don't even have the right model for it. On a real person. As if I wasn't real. As if I was just the invisible hands that created, while she was the beautiful body that deserved to display. She didn't just want to wear the dress. She wanted to wear my victory. She wanted to take my one masterpiece and make it her own. And my mother was nodding in agreement, her face lighting up. "What a wonderful idea, Clara. You'd be doing your sister a huge favor." In that one soul-crushing moment, I looked at their faces. My father, looking uncomfortable but saying nothing to defend me. My sister, her eyes gleaming with a triumphant, predatory light. And my mother, her face a mask of cruel, misguided honesty. Something inside me didn't just break. It vaporized. The years of quiet pleas for their approval, the desperate hope that one day they would see me, all of it turned to ash. I realized the truth with a clarity that was both devastating and liberating. They would never see me, because they didn't want to. My role was to be the backdrop for Clara's brilliant life, and any attempt to step into the spotlight was a threat to the established order of their world. They were still talking, discussing how Clara would need to be careful with the delicate fabric, when I finally found my voice. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it cut through their chatter like a blade. They all turned to look at me, surprised. "No," I repeated, louder this time, stepping between Clara and my dress. "You will not touch it." In that one soul-crushing moment, they handed me the one thing I never knew I needed. The freedom that comes from having nothing left to lose. They had no idea I was walking into that final competition armed with more than just a dress. I spent that night locked in my room, the silence a stark contrast to the hurricane raging inside me. Their words echoed in my head. Not pretty enough. On a real person. Every syllable was a fresh wound. For hours, I just sat on the floor, staring at the dress. It seemed to mock me now, a beautiful, impossible dream. I was ready to quit. I opened my laptop and typed, "Withdraw from Next Gen Award" into the search bar. I would pack the dress away in a box, bury it in the back of my closet, and resign myself to a life in the shadows. It would be easier. It would hurt less. Then, through the blur of my tears, I saw the faint glow of my laptop screen, the designer forum still open in a tab. On a desperate whim, a last, faint cry for help, I logged in. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I poured out everything that had just happened, my words a jumble of pain and humiliation. I didn't edit or second guess. I just typed. I told Aurelius about my parents, my sister, their cruel words, and my decision to withdraw. I hit send, expecting nothing more than perhaps a word of sympathy, if he even saw it at all. I must have fallen asleep on the floor because I was woken by the soft chime of a notification. A new message. It was from Aurelius. My heart hammered against my ribs as I opened it. His reply was longer than usual, and the tone was different. It was no longer the detached critique of a mentor. It was something fiercely personal. "Lily," it began, "do not you dare. Do not you dare let their small, colorless world dim your light. Their words are a cage, and your talent is the key to break out of it. They say you are not pretty enough. What a pathetic, limited definition of beauty. They speak of a presence they can't see in you because they are blind to anything that doesn't reflect their own narrow values. Beauty is not symmetry. It is courage. Beauty is not perfection. It is authenticity. This dress you have made is not just a garment. It is your voice. And it is a powerful one. Do not let them silence it. I have seen the work of hundreds of aspiring designers. Yours has something rare. A soul. You are not quitting. You are going to that show. And you are going to show them all what true beauty looks like. I believe in this design. I believe in you. I will be there tomorrow. Look for me. A. I read the message once, then twice, then a third time. Tears streamed down my face again. But these were different. They weren't tears of hurt. They were tears of gratitude, of a profound and startling hope. Someone I had never met, someone I revered, saw me. He didn't just see the dress. He saw me. And his belief felt like a shield. The final initial, A, sent a jolt through me. It was just a letter, but it felt like a promise. A new idea, terrifying and exhilarating, began to form in my mind. My family thought I wasn't pretty enough to wear my own dress. Clara thought she could just step in and claim it. I would show them. My plan had been to have a professional model from the competition showcase my design. But not anymore. The dress was called The Reclamation. It was about reclaiming one's power. How could anyone else wear it? I was going to model it myself. The decision was like jumping off a cliff. I had never walked a runway. I was not model thin. I was just me. But Aurelius's words had planted a seed of defiance. Beauty is courage. This would be my courageous act. My plan shifted. It was no longer about winning their approval. It was no longer even about winning the competition. It was about standing on that stage, in my creation, and looking my family in the eye as the person I truly was, not the person they had tried to make me. The next 24 hours were a whirlwind of transformation. I called Alex, my voice shaking but resolute. "I need your help. I'm modeling the dress myself." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line, followed by a whoop of pure joy. "Yes, Lily, yes. It's what I've been telling you all along. I will be there in 20 minutes. We're going to turn you into a warrior queen." He arrived with a bag full of makeup, hair products, and an unstoppable supply of confidence. He put on a playlist of powerful female artists, and for the next few hours, he became my drill sergeant. We pushed the furniture in my room against the walls to create a makeshift runway. He taught me how to walk, how to hold my head high, how to find my light. Don't look at your feet, he commanded. Look ahead. Imagine you're walking towards your future, and everyone who ever doubted you is behind you, getting smaller and smaller. You are not asking for their permission to be there. You own that stage. He taught me to walk with my shoulders back, to let my hips sway with the weight of the imaginary skirt, to make my movement a part of the dress's story. He did my makeup, not to hide my face, but to accentuate it. He used dark liner to bring out the intensity in my eyes, and a bold, deep red lipstick that felt like armor. This isn't about being pretty, he said, as he worked. This is about being unforgettable. When he was done, he spun me around to face the mirror. The person looking back was me, but it was a version of me I had never seen before. She was not pretty in the way Clara was. She was striking. She was powerful. She looked like she had a story to tell. As I packed my dress into its garment bag, a strange, profound calm settled over me. My family was coming to the show. I knew they were. They wouldn't miss the chance to witness my presumed failure, to be able to say, "We told you so." They were expecting to see the same quiet, insecure girl they had belittled their entire lives. What they were about to witness was not a failure, but a reckoning. The backstage area of the competition was an ecosystem of organized chaos. Models with impossibly long legs rushed past in clouds of hairspray. Designers made frantic last-minute adjustments, and the air crackled with a potent mixture of ambition and anxiety. I found my designated station, a small space with my name on it, and carefully hung my dress. Seeing it there, amidst the creations of the other finalists, I felt a familiar pang of doubt. The other designs were beautiful, polished, and professional, but mine felt like a raw nerve. It was personal. I saw one of the other designers, a girl from FIT, give me a kind smile. "That's a stunning piece," she said, nodding at my gown. "The fabric is incredible." Her simple, genuine compliment was a small buoy in my sea of nerves. I changed into the dress, the cool silk a shock against my warm skin. It fit like a second skin, like it had been waiting for me. As I stood there, taking a steadying breath, I peeked through a crack in the curtain and saw my family finding their seats in the front row. They looked exactly as I knew they would. My father, with his arms crossed, looking at his watch. My mother, scanning the crowd, probably looking for someone she knew to impress. And Clara, whispering something to my mother, a smug little smile on her face. They looked so confident, so certain of the outcome. They were there to witness a car crash, and they had the best seats in the house. Seeing them steeled my resolve. This was not for them anymore. This was for me. The show began. One by one, the other finalists' designs came down the runway. They were incredible. A structured suit made of recycled materials, a whimsical gown that looked like a watercolor painting, a sleek, minimalist dress that was the epitome of chic. With each one, I could feel my family's judgment solidifying. I could almost hear their thoughts. "See, Lily? This is what real design looks like." They were probably comparing each professional design to my homemade project, their pity for me growing. Then, it was my turn. A stagehand gave me a final check. "You're up, Lily," she said, giving me a small, encouraging nod. "You look amazing. Break a leg." As I stepped into the blinding white light of the runway, the music swelled. It was a haunting, powerful, instrumental piece I had chosen myself. For the first few steps, my entire body trembled. My mind was a deafening roar of every insult, every dismissal, every moment of my life I had been made to feel small. Not pretty enough. Homemade. Too sensitive. A real person. Then, I remembered Alex's words. "You own this stage." I lifted my chin. I looked straight ahead, past the faceless silhouettes in the audience, to a point on the back wall. The dress moved with me, the layers of organza floating like a dark, beautiful storm. I could hear a shift in the crowd, a collective intake of breath. The murmurs started, appreciative and curious. I reached the end of the runway and posed, just as Alex had taught me, holding the moment for a beat longer than felt comfortable. And in that moment, I risked a glance at my family. The sight was more satisfying than I could have ever imagined. Their faces were frozen in identical masks of utter shock. My father's jaw was literally agape. My mother's hand was covering her mouth. And Clara looked like she had seen a ghost. They didn't recognize me. They didn't recognize the power, the confidence, the unapologetic presence of the woman wearing the dress. I turned and walked back, my steps sure and steady, the train of my dress trailing behind me like a victory banner. The awards ceremony felt like a dream. All the finalists lined up on stage. The host introduced the head judge, the man whose opinion mattered more than anyone else's in the room, and out walked Antoine Dubois. He was an icon, a living legend with silver hair and eyes that had seen decades of fashion history. I felt a wave of nausea. This was the man whose protege I was competing against. He stepped up to the microphone, a warm smile on his face. "Good evening," he said, his voice a gentle, commanding baritone. "Every year, this competition reminds me that the future of fashion is bright. This year, however, one designer stood out, not just for their technical skill, but for their raw, unflinching honesty, for their courage." He paused, and his eyes scanned the line of nervous designers. Then he said something that made the entire room fall silent. "For several months, I have been anonymously mentoring a young artist online, a designer of immense potential, under the name Aurelius's." A collective gasp went through the audience. My blood ran cold. It couldn't be. My mind was spinning, trying to connect the dots. Aurelius. Antoine. Ah. His eyes found mine, and he smiled. It was a smile of recognition, of pride. "The winner of the Next Gen Fashion Award," he announced, his voice ringing through the silent hall, "is Lily Evans for her design, The Reclamation." The world exploded into applause. I stood, frozen, as confetti rained down from the ceiling. Alex was screaming and jumping in the audience. I felt a gentle nudge from the designer next to me. It was real. I had won. As I walked forward to accept the trophy, my gaze was pulled, as if by a magnet, back to my family. Their faces no longer just showed shock. They showed a dawning public horror. The dots were connecting for them, too. They hadn't just insulted their daughter. They hadn't just belittled a silly hobby. They had publicly scorned the chosen protege of Antoine Dubois, in front of him, in front of everyone. I saw my mother whisper something frantically to my father, who looked ill. Clara was staring at me, her mask of perfect composure completely shattered, revealing the raw panic beneath. I accepted the award from Antoine's hands, and he whispered, "I told you, courage is beauty." I stepped up to the microphone, my hands shaking as I clutched the heavy trophy. I thanked the judges, the competition organizers, and then I took a deep breath. I looked out into the crowd, my eyes sweeping past my family, but my words were for them. This dress is for anyone who has ever been told they weren't enough," I said, my voice clear and strong. "It's for anyone who has been called homemade as an insult. It's for anyone who has been made to feel invisible in their own life. It is proof that you should never, ever let someone else's small vision limit the size of your own dreams. Your voice matters. Your story matters. Reclaim it." Oh, walking off that stage, clutching the award, I felt a weight lift that I had been carrying my entire life. The battle was won, but I knew the war for my own future was just beginning. The moment I stepped off the stage, I was enveloped in a tidal wave of noise and congratulations. Other designers, models, and even some of the judges rushed to shake my hand, to touch the fabric of my dress, to tell me how much my speech had moved them. Through the crowd, I saw Alex, his face a mess of joyful tears, and I threw my arms around him. "You did it!" he yelled over the din. "I knew you would!" The girl from FIT who had complimented me earlier found me and gave me a huge hug. "Your speech made me cry," she confessed. "Thank you." In that moment, I felt a sense of belonging I had never known. Antoine Dubois found me a few minutes later, gently steering me through the throng to a quieter corner. "You have a very busy year ahead of you, Lily," he said, his eyes twinkling. "We have much work to do. But tonight, you celebrate." He handed me a business card. "My assistant will call you on Monday to set up our first mentorship meeting. Get some rest. You've earned it. From the corner of my eye, I saw them. My family. They were trying to push through the crowd, their faces etched with a desperate urgency. My mother was calling my name, her voice shrill. Clara looked pale and frantic. My father looked lost. For a fleeting second, the old, conditioned impulse to go to them, to smooth things over, to manage their emotions, flared up. But I extinguished it. I let the crowd of strangers, who in that moment felt more like family than my own blood, become my shield. I turned my back on them and allowed myself to be swept away by the current of my new reality. My phone, which I'd left in my bag, was vibrating nonstop. When I finally checked it an hour later at a celebratory dinner with Alex and a few other designers, it was flooded with messages from them. From my mother, Lily, we need to talk. This is all a terrible misunderstanding. You know we've always supported your art. Call me immediately. From Clara. I can't believe you didn't tell us you knew Antoine Dubois. Why would you keep that a secret from us? That was a cruel thing to do, letting us look like fools. You did this on purpose. From my father. You made a scene and embarrassed the family, Lily. We will discuss this when you get home. I read the messages one by one. There was no apology. No congratulations. Only accusations, bewilderment, and a stunning lack of self-awareness. They weren't sorry for what they did. They were horrified that they had been caught, that their poor judgment had been exposed on such a public stage. Clara's message was the most telling. She wasn't upset that she had hurt me. She was angry that I had a secret, an advantage, that she didn't know about. It was never about me. It was always about her position in the hierarchy. I showed the messages to Alex. He just shook his head. Unbelievable. They still don't get it. They never will, I said. And for the first time, the thought didn't fill me with sadness. It filled me with peace. I switched my phone to silent. I wasn't going home. I couldn't. The thought of returning to that small bedroom, to their suffocating judgment, was unbearable. After dinner, Alex and I went online and, using the last of my savings before the prize money came through, I booked a room at a boutique hotel downtown for 3 nights. It felt like the most extravagant and necessary purchase of my life. Walking into that hotel room was like taking my first breath of clean air after years in a stuffy, windowless room. It was small and simple, but it was mine. I took off the dress, hanging it carefully on the back of the door where it caught the city lights from the window, and changed into a simple t-shirt and sweatpants. I stood at the window, looking out at the glittering expanse of the city, a city that suddenly felt full of promise instead of indifference. I ordered room service for the first time in my life, a slice of ridiculously expensive chocolate cake, and ate it sitting on the bed, watching late-night TV. It was a simple act, but it felt like the peak of freedom. I had spent my entire life trying to earn their love, contorting myself into smaller, quieter shapes to be more acceptable to them, and it had never worked. The irony was that the moment I had stopped trying, the moment I had stood up and unapologetically been myself, was the moment the world had opened its arms to me. The silence from my end was the loudest statement I had ever made. They expected me to come back, to explain myself, to eventually fold as I always had. They didn't realize I hadn't just won a competition. I had just bought a one-way ticket to a new life. 8 months later, the girl who walked that runway felt like a lifetime away. My life was unrecognizable, in the best possible way. The prize money and Antoine's guidance had been a launchpad. I had moved out of my parents' house the day after the competition and never looked back. I now lived in a small but light-filled studio apartment in the city's arts district. The walls weren't just covered in sketches. They were covered in finished samples, press clippings, and a framed photo of me and Antoine laughing during one of our mentorship sessions. Florence, my trusty dress form, stood proudly in the corner, draped in the beginnings of a new creation. My days were spent working on my debut capsule collection, a direct extension of the themes in The Reclamation. Antoine was a brilliant, demanding, and incredibly kind mentor. He pushed me to refine my technique, to think about the business side of fashion, and most importantly, to trust my own voice. Authenticity is the only currency that matters in this industry, Lily, he would say, peering at a design over his glasses. It is the one thing no one can copy. Never lose it. His belief in me was a constant, steadying force, a stark contrast to the conditional support I'd known my whole life. I was happier than I had ever been. I had a new circle of friends, other young artists, designers, and musicians I'd met through my work. We supported each other, collaborated, and celebrated each other's successes. Alex, of course, remained my rock. My first call for every minor crisis and major triumph. My confidence, once a flickering candle, was now a steady flame. I wore clothes that made me feel good, spoke up in meetings, and learned to take a compliment without deflecting. Meanwhile, the family I had left behind had begun to unravel. I heard snippets through a sympathetic cousin, Sarah, who called me occasionally to check in. Without me as the designated scapegoat and Clara as the undisputed star, the family's delicate ecosystem had collapsed. The public humiliation at the show had been a significant blow to my parents' social standing. Their friends, who had witnessed their dismissive attitude firsthand, now saw them differently. Their attempts to brag about my success, our daughter, the award-winning designer, rang hollow. Sarah told me that at a recent dinner party, someone had asked my mother what she thought of my design before the show, and my mother had turned beet red and changed the subject. The shame had followed them. Clara had it the worst. Her identity was so wrapped up in being the perfect, successful daughter that my sudden, spectacular success had sent her into a tailspin. Her fiancé, a man who valued status above all else, was reportedly embarrassed by the incident and the subsequent gossip. They argued constantly. Their wedding was postponed indefinitely. Without my parents' undivided adoration, and with her own achievements suddenly seeming less impressive, Clara grew resentful and withdrawn. Sarah said she'd quit her marketing job, claiming she wanted to find her own passion, but had mostly just been spending her days at home. The golden child had lost her shine. My mother was the first to try and bridge the chasm. She called me about 2 months after the show. Her voice was strained, wrapped in a blanket of false cheerfulness. "Lily, darling, your father and I were just thinking, it's been too long. We should put all this silliness behind us. Family is the most important thing, after all." I listened patiently. "Mom," I said, my voice calm and steady, a voice I hadn't had with her before. "I appreciate you calling, but what happened wasn't silly. It was deeply hurtful, and it was the culmination of a lifetime of being treated as less than." "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she started, the old habit kicking in. "No," I interrupted gently but firmly. "I'm not being dramatic. I'm being honest. Our relationship can only move forward if it's based on mutual respect and a real understanding of what happened. And that's something that needs to be earned, not demanded." It would start with a real apology. There was a stunned silence. I had never set a boundary with her before. The conversation ended soon after, stilted and unresolved, but I felt a sense of clarity. I wasn't responsible for her feelings or for fixing our family. I was only responsible for protecting my own peace. My father's attempt came a few months later. It was a short, awkward text message after my first feature appeared in a local magazine. It just said, "Saw the article. The dress looks good. Dad." It wasn't an apology. It was barely a compliment, but it was a crack in the wall of his pride, a tiny admission that he might have been wrong. I texted back a simple, "Thank you." I didn't chase it. I knew that any real change had to come from them, not from me begging for it. I learned that Clara had eventually started seeing a therapist. My cousin told me she was struggling with feelings of inadequacy she'd never had to confront before. A part of me felt a flicker of sympathy for her. It couldn't have been easy to have your entire sense of self built on a foundation of comparison. I hoped, for her sake, that she would find her own way to be happy, a way that didn't involve diminishing someone else. Building a new life was exhilarating, but it also forced me to look back and truly understand the lessons hidden in the wreckage of my past. As I stand here today in my studio, surrounded by the beautiful, tangible results of my hard work, the final lesson of this journey has become crystal clear. For my entire life, I had been seeking validation from people who were incapable of giving it. I thought their approval was the prize. I thought if I just worked hard enough, was quiet enough, was good enough, I would finally earn a fraction of the love they gave my sister so freely. I was wrong. The prize was never their approval. The prize was learning to approve of myself. The greatest irony is that my parents, in their final, most cruel act of dismissal, gave me the greatest gift I have ever received. They set me free. When my mother told me I wasn't pretty enough for my own dress, she severed the last thread of hope I had that they would ever change. And in doing so, she severed the invisible chains of obligation and expectation that had bound me for 23 years. She forced me to find my validation elsewhere, first from a kind stranger online, and then, most importantly, from within myself. When you have absolutely nothing left to lose, you finally gain the freedom to be completely, unapologetically yourself. That night on the runway, I wasn't just modeling a dress, I was modeling a new way of being. I was showing them, and myself, that I didn't need their permission to be powerful, to be beautiful, to exist. The dress, the reclamation, became more than just a design. It became my personal declaration of independence. It was a testament to the fact that our worth is not something that can be granted or taken away by others. It is inherent. It is the very fabric of who we are. It's stitched into our DNA, waiting for us to acknowledge it. I learned that the concept of being pretty enough is one of the most insidious cages ever built. It's a cage that keeps us small, quiet, and compliant. It forces us to measure ourselves against an impossible, ever-shifting standard, usually one set by people who benefit from our insecurity. But the moment you realize that true beauty isn't about fitting in but about standing out as your authentic self, the walls of that cage just crumble. True beauty is the courage Antoine spoke of. It's the resilience to create something beautiful out of your pain. It's the grace to walk away from people who refuse to see your value. It's the strength in your own two hands, the conviction in your own heart. And I've learned a hard but vital lesson about family. Family should be a safe harbor, not a battlefield. It should be the place where you are loved, not in spite of your quirks, but because of them. For years, I thought that because we shared blood, I was obligated to endure the constant, low-grade emotional neglect. I thought it was my job to absorb their casual cruelty and keep the peace. I was wrong. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to love someone from a distance. The family I have now is the one I built. It's Alex, who saw my talent when I couldn't. It's Antoine, who saw my soul in a sketch. It's the circle of friends who celebrate my victories as if they were their own. It's a family built on a foundation of mutual respect and chosen affection. My relationship with my parents and sister is still a work in progress, conducted mostly from afar. They have sent birthday cards and holiday texts. We haven't had another major confrontation, but the old dynamic is gone forever. The power has shifted. I no longer need anything from them, and this has, paradoxically, opened up the smallest possibility for a new kind of relationship to one day emerge, one where I am not the invisible daughter, but an equal they are learning to see for the first time. Last month, Clara sent me a text. It just said, "I saw a picture of your new collection. It's beautiful. I'm sorry." It was the first real apology I'd ever received from her. I don't know where it will lead, but it's a start. Perhaps one day we will get there. Perhaps not. But either way, I am okay. My life now is rich and full. My capsule collection sold out within a week of its launch. I am already working on my next one, and I've started a small online mentorship group of my own, a tribute to Aurelius, where I try to give other young, overlooked designers the encouragement he gave me. But the biggest success isn't the sales or the articles. It's the feeling I get every morning when I walk into this studio. It's a feeling of peace, of purpose, of being exactly where I am supposed to be. I still have moments of doubt they are the ghosts of a former life, but now I know how to quiet them. I just remember the feeling of walking down that runway, the weight of that beautiful fabric moving with me, a testament to my own strength. So I have a question for all of you watching. Have you ever had a moment that forced you to stand up and reclaim your own story? A time when you had to stop listening to the critics and start listening to your own voice? I would love to hear about it in the comments below. Your stories inspire me and everyone else in this community, and they remind us that we are not alone in our struggles. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe for more stories about overcoming the odds, and share this with anyone who needs to hear that they are more than enough, just as they are. Thank you for listening, and remember to wear your own truth. It will always be the most beautiful thing you own.